Welcome to Haunt Tech Tips, the source for technical advice to take your haunted attraction to the next level. Here's your host, Chris Gay.
Welcome back, everyone. This week's topic, Cat5 is cheap. So before we get started, I just wanted to put out there that we will be at Transworld in St. Louis in March. Also, we'll be presenting at the National Haunters and Halloween Convention in Atlantic City, New Jersey in May. Check the show notes. There will be links to those events. Definitely fantastic conferences to get out to see new haunt tech, see costumes, makeup, classes, other people in the industry. You can just learn so much in so short a time at these shows, and the ticket prices aren't that high. If they're anywhere near you, definitely worth a day trip, if not a whole weekend. Back on topic, Cat5 cable, also known as Category 5 Twisted Pair Cable, Ethernet cable. This is the basic internet cable that connects pretty much every wired computer out there right now. There are higher category cables, Cat6, Cat6A, but those are more specialty at the moment. There's not a whole lot of use for those other than network trunk lines that are there to carry a whole lot of data. And some people are future-proofing by installing it, but Cat5 is now what's out there, and you probably have these in your house, and you may or may not even realize it. It's $50 or $60 for a 100-foot box of pure copper Cat5. Granted, that is, industry installer prices. If you just go on Amazon, you're looking closer to $80 to $100. Although you can get 500-foot boxes on Amazon right now for in the ballpark of $40, $50. If you go to electrical supply houses, though, AV supply houses, you can find this for $50 for a 100-foot box. Pure copper Cat5 is the best because it is straight up copper. It's the most conductive. It's going to last the longest. That, my opinion, is skewed a little bit here because I live at the Jersey Shore. There's a lot of salt content in the air due to the ocean, and the salty air creates rapid corrosion. You'll see cheaper Cat5, which says CCA, that is copper-clad aluminum. If you live somewhere that corrosion's not an issue, and if your show is in a fully enclosed climate-controlled area, you can probably get away with copper-clad aluminum just fine. However, the standard copper will carry power better, and over the years will hold up better. It's not a huge price difference. It may be up to 50% depending where you shop. Personally, I try to stay away from copper-clad aluminum unless it's very short run, per se, across my desk, something like that. Further, long runs with copper-clad aluminum, you stay away from that in general because, again, it's not as conductive. It's not going to carry a signal as clean and clear as standard copper. When you buy this wire, you can buy it two ways, either pre-made cables, which I would say stay away from because there's a premium price on these and you're going to pay a whole lot more per foot for a 100-foot pre-made cable than you will for a 500-foot box of cable without ends on it. Now, this does mean that you're going to have to pick up some RJ45 ends and a crimp tool that does these. Now, I strongly recommend investing a little bit and getting RJ45 EZ ends and tools. These cost slightly more. The difference is a traditional RJ45 tool, which is a tool that crimps on the plastic connector at the end of a Cat5 wire. You have to line up everything perfectly for it to have the ends of the Cat5 lined up right, and for the tool to actually crimp down on the jacket and hold everything in place. Long story short, this was hard. Even for myself, it's a chore. Doable, yes, but it's a chore. For the EZ connectors, the wire actually slides through the end of the connector and the tool cuts off the excess wire as it crimps down onto the connector. This gives you a couple huge advantages. A, it's faster because you don't have to trim everything to exact lengths. B, you can visually verify that you have your wires in the correct color pattern before you crimp down. That's huge. That will save you so much time because it is possible while you're putting the wires in the connector that they can cross each other or you just mix up your colors. Things happen. RJ45 EZ ends are the way to go, but you have to make sure you have an EZ tool, otherwise it won't cut off at the end and it'll just jam itself up. Now that we have this tool and we have your Cat5, what can you use it for? Obviously, network. If you have computers around your haunt, you can wire them together. You're not going to connect computer to computer, but if you have a modem, say you have Comcast, Cox Cable, whoever, you can now hardwire computers instead of using Wi-Fi, which just makes things more reliable. And hardwires, at least at the moment, always going to be faster than Wi-Fi, just because hardwired does not experience interference unless it's long runs, and even then it's negligible. If you have your cable modem, your DSL modem, whichever, it should have 4 or 5 plugs on the back. You can use the ones that are labeled output, and those will go out to your computers, to your registers, to your Wi-Fi, to your security camera recorder. Anything in your haunt that is wired and networkable, Cat5 is the best way to go if you can do it. You should see slight gains in network speed by doing this, even if you have a good Wi-Fi connection. Unless you have the latest, greatest Wi-Fi router, hardwire is just the best way to go. That's obvious. Of course, Cat5 is network cable. It's made for networking. But you can use it for audio. There are little devices called balins. And what a balun is, it is a small clip-on plastic piece. Some use the RJ45N, some just use the bare copper. On either end of the balun is a RCA, a 1/8 inch or 1/4 inch or XLR plug. So you plug your existing male wire into this balun, and then the Cat5 between the two baluns. So you have to have a set of baluns, your Cat5 run, and then your source and your media player on either side, and this will transceive your audio signal over Cat5 for quite some distance. And since Cat5 is a twisted pair of wire, the inherent way it's made helps reduce interference. And the baluns also, not that they're active devices, most of them are passive, but they encode and decode, and they have a way of filtering out interference. So where you would not want to have a long, unbalanced RCA wire run, or 1/8 inch headphone, 1/4 inch audio run, with Cat5 you can do that. And not to mention, Cat5 is cheap. Go try to buy a 150-foot RCA cable versus 150 foot of Cat5 out of a box. You'll see a huge price savings there. Yes, you need to buy the balun, but baluns are reusable, and they're not even that expensive. On Amazon, you can find a balun for almost anything, and you'll just Google or Amazon search Cat5 balun for RCA, Cat5 balun for 1/8 inch audio, Cat5 balun for XLR, so on and so forth. Check the reviews. The baluns are mostly made in China at the moment. There are good ones. There are bad ones. Check the reviews and try not to be the first person to buy something. That goes on Amazon in general right now. Unfortunately, there's a lot of Chinese lower-end equipment out there, and you can see on my sister channel, Tech Medic, we do a lot of reviews of these things. Some are great, some junk, so you never know. I have no experience, I'll admit, with the XLR over Cat5 baluns, but it should work. RCA and 1/8 inch I've done over Cat5 plenty of times. I've used this for in-house audio installs where the receiver is far away from a computer in a meeting room, something like that. That works great. And this is a way that you can extend the reach of your audio wire massively. There's also DMX over Cat5 balun. I don't have experience with this either. There's no reason it shouldn't work. Check the reviews. But if you do have a DMX controlled system, some Peekaboo and some other controllers are starting to have DMX, valid way to extend it, because again, DMX cable is rather expensive if it's a long run. You can do USB over Cat5 using baluns. This is awesome if you have a computer somewhere that's running a scare, or even a video running computer that runs some loop or something of that nature, and it's a little bit too far for a wireless mouse, which don't depend on a wireless mouse for a scare. If you're at home alone and you have a wireless mouse, you should be able to go almost anywhere in your house. It will work. But as we learned last year at the Trail of Terror, if you bring 12 people into a room and they each have a cell phone or, whatever electronics on them, suddenly that wireless mouse might not work. And as a trigger for a prop, that's a bad thing. So you can use your USB balun over Cat5 to either have a hardwire mouse where you need it so you can click and start something, or use a wireless mouse but have that wireless receiver very close to where the mouse is now located. instead of at the media player that's across the room, at a projector, at a TV, etc. This can also work great if you have a USB-based stick in a TV. There's some microcomputers, things like that, that have wireless USB to a mouse, or wireless to a USB mouse, and sometimes just behind a TV, for some reason, the materials of the TV will block that signal. Or even if you have a network video recorder in a lockbox, use that Cat5 USB balun to bring the wireless receiver for the mouse outside of the metal lockbox, because those lockboxes act as Faraday cages, not perfectly, but somewhat, just enough that you won't be able to control your camera system using your mouse unless it's hardwired, and oftentimes those lockboxes are in a closet, up on a wall, underneath a desk, somewhere you can't have a hardwired mouse run to. Now, here's where it starts to get fun and your cost savings get huge. Video over Cat5. Again, this is using baluns. Once it comes to video, I've used RCA over Cat5. That is a passive balun, meaning you plug it in, it works. Once you go HD, using VGA or HDMI over Cat5, VGA, some of them are passive. HDMI, almost all of them are active, meaning that the balun, the transceiver, is a powered device. So on either end, or at least one end, it's going to be plugged into an outlet, and you'll have your HDMI in, your HDMI out, and the two devices connect the HDMI as if an extension cable over the Cat5, just like a standard balun. However, it's active because there's some processing that goes into this. HDMI is a 19-pin cable format, and Cat5 is only 4 twisted pairs. Essentially, what it's doing is compressing this HDMI signal into a high-frequency signal that can travel over the Cat5, and then decompressing it back into a 19-pin HDMI signal. Long story short, plug it in both sides, plug it into power on one or two sides depending on the device. Some pass some power over the cable, some don't. Now you've extended your HDMI cable, and you've got to watch on these. It'll say the maximum distance for the transmitter receiver pair. Usually it's 100, 150, 200 foot or so. It all depends on the devices you're buying, and that goes for any of these baluns. There'll be a rating on the product site, or at least there should be, that will tell you how far you can run it. But again, I will guarantee you that a 100-foot HDMI cable is going to cost a whole lot more than Cat5 and 2 HDMI over Cat5 extenders. Plus, a 100-foot HDMI cable is not going to work anyway unless you have some fancy special mojo going, because HDMI was designed to be about 6 foot long. Now, you can get 15, 20, maybe 25-foot cables that work fine, but beyond that, I've seen HDMI cables not always reliable if you go anything longer than 20, 25, 50 foot. They do work sometimes. It really depends on the sensitivity of the receiving monitor, projector, whichever, and the sending power of the media device that is sending out the HDMI signal. Most devices, it's supposed to be standardized. It's not perfect. It's an inexact science. So just go with one of these if your HDMI run's going to be more than 12 foot or so. It'll save you a lot of headache, and it should save you some money as well. For VGA, very similar. Some of them are passive. Different devices out there, but same idea. VGA cables can run a little bit of distance, but anything over 25 foot, I've seen have some issues. You have some color drops. You have some just generic interference. So VGA, this should save you as well. And RCA, being a totally unbalanced, unshielded cable, you should see huge gains with this if you're doing any distance. Beyond that, security cameras or even scare cams, things like that, you can transmit your video over Cat5. Again, this uses baluns for analog cameras, and there are network cameras that just straight plug into Cat5, plug into a power over Ethernet switch or recorder, and now you have your camera installed using one wire instead of a power wire and a coax. If you're using an analog camera, best practice here is to use one pair with the video balun, and then the other 3 pairs, however you do it, pair them off so that you are using them for power, and you've got to be consistent here. You don't want to cross them, but you can send power over Cat5, but only so much power. We'll get into that a little bit later here. You can also use Cat5 as a trigger wire for your props, because keep in mind, this is a 4-pair wire. For your sensors that are normally open, normally closed, be it your brake beams, your motion sensors, your magnetic contact wire, so on and so forth, This is 4 pairs of wire, so you can have one Cat5 actually go out to 4 different sensors. If you have a trunk line or whatnot, this is huge if this goes back to a main control center. So one length of Cat5 is 4 pairs of wire. So you can really control 4 props, 4 triggers, 4 sensors, whichever out of this. I would not use it for 4 different power supplies. I would only try to power 1 device per Cat5 ever. Getting into that, this is a direct quote from the Handbook of Electronic Tables and Formulas for American Wire Gauge. A conservative estimate for 24 average wire gauge, which Cat5 is a thin wire. Usually you want solid copper. There is stranded copper Cat5. That's not what this is referring to. But it's 24 average wire gauge. And the power transmission it's rated for is 0.577 amps. So that's going to be right at half an amp. You really don't want to be pushing half an amp through this. It can. It might get a little warm. You don't want to have a lot of this coiled up or whatnot. And I should go further in depth and explain that 0.577 amps or half an amp, if you're looking at power supplies, if you see something that's 500 milliamps, that's the same thing. 500 milliamps is half an amp. 1000 milliamps, that would be an amp. That's more than you want to put over Cat5. You can power limited things with this. A lot of LEDs, that's a very valid idea. Although again, Cat5 is not what you want to be running for power, but it can in a pinch. So keep that in your toolbox. Not plan A, but it can definitely power things, including cameras, as I explained earlier. Now, when you're doing Cat5 for networking, there is a length limit. 325 foot, roughly, is the limit of how far it will carry a signal with integrity. I always say stick to 300 foot, just because it's not worth the occasional drops, slowdowns, etc., especially if you're in a hot situation, because how many crazy things do we have, and also how often do you exactly count 300 foot, 325 foot, so 300 is usually pretty good. There are Cat5 extenders out there, little devices that plug in mid-run and will extend and repeat that. A lot of those require that PoE, the power over Ethernet, to operate. Or easier yet, you can use switches. There's a couple different network devices. There's switches, there's routers, and there's modems. Your modem is what your internet comes from, be it from cable, from phone lines, from fiber, be it satellite, whichever. That's your modem. Your router is what sends out internet to all your devices. So some modem routers are one machine, not all. My personal setup, my modem, it's just a cable wire in, one Cat5 out, then it goes to a router which does my Wi-Fi and all of my physical routing. Your router is what hands out the IP addresses, the network address to everything you plug in automatically for you. You can plug one computer into a modem, that's it, unless you do some fancy programming, but the router makes things easier. A switch, on the other hand, is a dumb device. There are smart switches out there, we're not going to get into that today. A typical dumb switch, or unmanaged switch, is essentially a surge strip or a power strip that we would plug in an outlet and turn one outlet into 5, but that's the network version. You plug in one feed, and all the rest of the Cat5 RJ45 plugs on the switch are now outlets for internet. So if you have a 5-port switch, that means port 1, plug in your feed from your router or from another switch. Now ports 2 through 5 are all outs. So you could use a 5-port switch per se you have a 1,000-foot long building. You put one 5-port switch 300 foot from the location of your router where your internet starts at. Now you have a 600-foot reach from that modem router combination, whichever, to your final device. So switches are essentially power strips for internet, so you can extend things out further. Plus you can web things out here. So if you have your 1,000-foot building, your modem is dead center in that building, and with your router, you can go 300 foot in either direction, put in a switch, and spiderweb that out. You just covered an entire building that's 1,000 foot wide using your modem and router, 2 switches, and Cat5 wire. This is huge when it comes to network cameras, network devices, computers, so on and so forth, because you no longer have to home run a wire from every single device back to the recorder, network hub, so on and so forth. So this saves you both in wire and, more importantly, time and labor. And that's why the catchphrase Cat5 is cheap is so important here, because yes, the wire is cheap versus the labor that you could do home running 14 camera wires versus home running all sorts of network cable back to one location versus putting a switch in the middle. That's a huge time and labor savings, and it's just going to make your whole attraction cleaner because there's going to be less overall wire. In summation here, go out, get yourself a box of Cat5 wire, an RJ45 easy tool, an RJ45 easy ends. Learn how to terminate those ends. There's a couple formats. There's A format and B format. A format is typically for telephone type things. B format is networking, and most modern applications use B format. It doesn't truly matter which format you use, because as long as the wires are the same on either end, it will work. But if you ever have to work on something down the road, you really want to stick with these formats. And if you look at the underside of the connector, so the clip-in lock is facing downwards, B format, I'll just go over this quickly just to prove that I'm not reading notes here, anything of that nature. You memorize this after you do enough of these, and I've done thousands of these things. Orange, white, orange, green, white, blue, blue, white, green, brown, white, brown. That's how it goes. I don't have a mnemonic for that to memorize it. I've just done so many, it's ingrained. You'll see that pattern, you'll see it in different places, and again, you want to stick universal. You do want to label your wires, because you definitely don't want to be plugging in a RCA balun into your network. That could cause some issues. You can get Cat5 in different colors. I use white or black quite a bit. White hides well in residential or business settings. Black obviously hides well in haunt settings. But you can get blue, green, pink, brown. It comes in all different colors. I would stay away from red. Red is typically reserved for fire alarm wiring, but you can get it if you want, if you have a specific reason. Per se, you have a red room and you need to hide some wire. Cat5 will serve you well. There are endless uses for it, and you can even get little side jobs, just terminating cables for people. A lot of the time, you'll see someone that bought pre-made cables, and they have 30 foot of excess cable for every single device behind their computer, behind their router, because they don't know how to do this. They overpaid, and now they have a sloppy job just because they didn't learn how to make Cat5. Again, not all baluns even require you to put ends on. Some just have little push terminals, and for trigger wiring, you don't need any of that. I do recommend sealant-filled wire connectors. If you do use Cat5 wire without RJ45 ends, these are little connectors about the size of a screw, which have a dielectric grease or gel inside, so that whatever Cat5 you twist together and place inside and then crimp down on doesn't corrode over time. And there's also little razor sharp teeth inside that hold everything together. You can crimp it with anything from a multi-tool, wire strippers, etc., and it just holds together Cat5 splices very well if you're doing something involving a trigger wire or whatnot. You really don't want to splice Cat5 if it is a network cable or anything like that, because there will be signal loss, there will be degradation. Will it work in a pinch? Probably, but no guarantees here. Just keep in mind the sealant connectors if you're using it for a non-traditional use for Cat5. And I'll leave you with one more thing here. If you're in a pinch, you need network run somewhere in a building, and there's just no way to run wire. Per se, you're in a historical building or somewhere it's a temporary haunt and you really can't run wire. There are these devices called Powerline network adapters. They're not perfect, but they've gotten very good. They cost a little bit. They're about $60 to $100 for a pair. Netgear makes a lot of them, TrendNet. There's several different brands on Amazon. What this does, you plug one in behind your router, behind a switch, whichever, and that is your transmitter. So you'll have a Cat5 wire that goes from your router, from your switch, into the Powerline adapter. Then the Powerline adapter just plugs into a standard power outlet. On the receiver end, wherever your electronic device that needs network is, you plug in the receiver Powerline adapter. Sometimes it doesn't matter. Sometimes they are transmitter-receiver pairs. Just read your instructions. You plug that in, and again, there's a Cat5 jack on that will go from that receiver device to your network device. If everything works out, which doesn't always, depending how the building is wired, you'll now have internet traveling over your power. It emits a high-frequency data stream that your other electronic devices won't even notice. It's not increasing voltage, anything like that. It is just putting a data stream over the copper power lines in your house. This can be very fast. These claim up to gigabit speeds, 1,000 megabytes a second. It's a claim, it's theoretical. You'll never actually see that. But if you buy a set that claims 500 megabytes a second, you can safely assume you're going to get 10, 20, 50 megabytes a second out of that. And that's it. Honestly, these things, they almost seem magical. It's a very neat technology. The only drawback is if you're in an old building that has knob and tube wiring, good luck, probably not going to work. You need copper wiring. If you're in a building that has more than one subpanel, as long as you're in the same subpanel, you should be fine. But if you go from 110 to 220 and back, you're going to lose it. If you're in a building and trying to put one outdoors and it goes through this panel or things like that, it may not work. So these are a trial and error sort of device. And Amazon is pretty understanding with returns on these sort of things. If you're in a standard residential setting with one electrical panel, these usually work great. And yes, there's some cost to them, but versus opening up drywall, I've used them in situations where the Comcast box went in on the ground floor of a 3-story house. You're never going to get internet on the 3rd story. So put this device in, then put a second wireless router upstairs, work great. In your haunt, this could be to run internet to your security camera recorder, to a network connected audio device, to a network TV, anything of that nature. Cat5 is cheap, but if you can't run Cat5, Powerline adapters are definitely a huge labor-saving option here. So I hope that helps. If you need assistance, again, check the show notes. I have some links on various tools. If you want some hands-on assistance, catch me at the National Haunters Convention in Atlantic City in May. I'll have tools with me there, and I can give you a hands-on tutorial.
Thanks for listening. Go to haunttechtips.com for show notes and more.